National Party are so keen to shut down debate on this bill before it's even gotten underway. Less than half an hour into the debate on this, with not one single National Party member taking a call on it, they've been trying to shut it down. Not one single National Party member, other than the Minister, trying to take a call on it, trying to shut it down. That's outrageous. And why is the National Party so afraid of actually debating this bill? It could be because the rhetoric doesn't live up, the reality, does not live up to the rhetoric that they have been making, that they have been putting forward. In fact, Mr. Chairman, it's very easy for the National Party to screech as they are over there at the moment, the Labour Party's soft on crime because we don't support this bill. We don't support this bill because it won't work. We will support things that actually do work. It is wrong to suggest that we're soft on crime, and in fact, the track record of the last few years would suggest otherwise. And some of the rhetoric that's been put forward to justify this bill just does not stand up to scrutiny. To claim, for example, that the Labour government didn't do anything to keep people in prison, keep the worst violent offenders in prison for longer, is simply not true. The new sentencing and parole laws that came into force in July 2004, for example, increased the minimum non-parole period for the worst murderers from 10 to 17 years. The worst offenders, the time that they have to wait between applications for parole has increased for up to 3 years instead of having the ability to apply automatically every year. Automatic release at 2/3 of the sentence for serious violent offenders has been abolished, and the preventative detention is now available to keep the worst violent offenders, sexual and violent offenders, in prison for longer. So it's simply wrong to say that we haven't done anything to actually keep those offenders in prison for longer and make the public safer. The point the Labour members are making on this particular bill is that 3 strikes will not work. It will not work, and there are already other things available that can deal with many of the concerns that have been raised, and the National Party knows that, and that could well be why they're not actually willing to debate this particular bill, and they're more interested in closing it down. I want to turn to the regulatory impact statement of the bill, because I think that raises a number of legitimate concerns. This is the government's own regulatory impact statement, and it found, for example, in public safety that it's not possible to conclude with any certainty the extent, to what extent any of these options will improve public safety. And there's a possibility that removing the worst repeat violent offenders from the community for longer periods of time will result in less serious violent offending. However, offenders who commit serious violent offences do not necessarily have previous serious sentences for serious violent offences. So surely that's where the debate should be at. It should be at how do we make the community safer? How do we actually crack down on serious violent offending before it takes place? What are the key causes of serious violent offending, and how can we address those? And we're not hearing anything from the government about what they're doing on that. Public confidence in the criminal justice system could actually be undermined by this legislation. This is the regulatory impact statement that argues this, that public confidence could be undermined if the worst repeat offenders policy raises the potential for disproportionate outcomes which may negatively affect public confidence in the criminal justice system. So actually, it's really important that the public have confidence that the criminal justice system is netting out a punishment that is fair and proportionate. And if it's not, the public confidence in the system will be eroded, and that has to be to the detriment of everybody. Most research has found, this is again from the regulatory impact statement, has found that imprisonment has little, if any, specific deterrent effect. There is a great deal of evidence indicating that offending rates decrease only marginally as a result of penalties being increased. Now, this is the regulatory impact statement that states that. That's not my claim. That's what the regulatory impact statement argues. So here we've got the government putting forward saying, well, actually we're going to deter repeat offending. I would suggest that if somebody's already on their second strike, the knowledge that they're going to go away from prison for a lot longer isn't necessarily going to act as a deterrent. One would think that the sentences that were available on the first and second strike would have acted as a deterrent. There are obviously other factors at play here that we need to deal with. This bill does nothing to address those. Looking at the financial cost, both the life without parole and the worst repeat violent offender policies represent a small but gradually increasing transfer of cost within the funding available, Mr Chair,
Chris Hipkins.
within the funding available to the justice sector, from the detention and prevention of offending to the detention of offenders who may, particularly once they're elderly, pose no risk to the public. Surely we should be focusing the resources on the detention and prevention of offending as much as we are. Sandra Gowdy says that's boring. Well, I say to Sandra Gowdy, I'd much rather prevent the crime in the first place, prevent the creation of victims in the first place, than have an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff to deal with the criminal offenders once they've already committed their crimes. I would rather have fewer victims in the first place, and Sandra Gowdy seems to think that's boring. I think that's an absolute disgrace, and that highlights the position of the National Party. They're not interested in preventing crime in the first place. They're more interested in punishment and retribution after the fact. That does nothing to make the community safer. Sandra Gowdy thinks the prevention is boring. I think that's absolutely disgraceful. I think it says it all about the National Party's approach on law and order.
Look,
Mr Speaker, I'm quoting from the...
While this is a robust debate and this continual screaming across the House is unacceptable, I'll ask you to tone it down. Interjections should be fair and reasonable, rare and reasonable. I'm happy with those, but yelling across is unacceptable. Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Just to remind the House, I'm actually I'm drawing from the regulatory impact statement on the government's own bill. So this is a regulatory impact statement. I think in this particular case it's been prepared by the police. So this is what they are saying. These are the concerns they are highlighting about the bill, and I think many of them are very valid concerns that they've been raising. Other concerns that have been raised about the bill are around the increased powers that it gives to the police as opposed to the judiciary, because it places a lot more discretion with the police regarding prosecutorial decisions, who gets prosecuted and for what crimes, rather than leaving the discretion with the judiciary. And so that could potentially create some perverse outcomes. It could result in the bargaining between police and the offender to lower the seriousness of the crime that's being prosecuted. And I think that would actually be wrong. If somebody that could actually lead to a worse outcome for the victims, a less safe community. And I think that's something that should be taken into account. Again, from the police's regulatory impact statement regarding homicide, this is a point put forward. From the analysis of a number of leading studies on three strikes laws in the USA, there's evidence that these laws may have resulted in an increased rate of homicide. So actually, an increased rate of homicide. Well, Mr Garrett says it's rubbish. I'm not making that claim. That's the claim that's in the regulatory impact statement to the government's bill. So that's actually a government department or a government agency putting forward that argument, not me. They are arguing that studies from the USA have concluded that the three strikes policy could have actually increased the rate of homicide. This bill can lead to unintended consequences. Both options are likely to result in fewer guilty pleas, and that's something that I'm very concerned about, particularly at stage 3 or where life imprisonment without parole is to be imposed. More appeals against individual convictions and sentences can also be expected.
Order. Point of order. The Honourable Clayton Crosgrove.
Convention in the House that if you're going to interject, you don't walk up and down the chamber, you don't move around, you interject from your seat.
I thank the member for that. The member is correct. When one is walking around within the chamber, one cannot speak at all and certainly can't interject and make comments. Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, the Attorney-General has raised concerns about the consistency of the bill with this current bill with the Bill of Rights. I'm not going to go into those, but just to make a few concluding comments. With regard to the position of victims, of course I sympathise with the victims, of course my heart goes out to them, of course I would like to see a greatest focus on the rights of victims, of course I believe that there are some people who should be locked up and kept locked away for a very long time. I am interested in what we can do to reform the criminal justice system so that we have fewer people entering the prison system in the first place, so that we reduce the rate of violent offending in the first place, rather than having the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. If any members of the House have a constructive suggestion about how that could happen, I'm willing to engage in that debate wholeheartedly. I would much rather focus the emphasis of debate on how we prevent offending, how we reduce the number of victims that are created in